What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about Yuffie's DLC, or Intermission, part of Final Fantasy VII Remake. So last week, we did Final Fantasy VII Remake. This time, I want to talk about this DLC, and then we're ready to go, at least in the new age, right, of Final Fantasy. I do still want to play the original. I'm planning on it. I got it written down in my notebook over here, and hope to play it sometime the second half of the year, and we'll do, a whole video breaking it down. While I know what happens, I've never played it before, so I'm very much looking forward to one day doing that. And I want to look at this game and talk about, is it as good as I remember it being, doing a kind of 2024 review. I remember when this came out, and it came out 3 years ago, and I remember, and the first thing I really want to talk about here, the history and leading into it, the controversy. There's actually quite a bit of controversy because this was part of that Intergrade, right? And the idea was PS5 exclusive. So we're still, at the time this game comes out, we're about 6 to 7 months in on the PS5 life cycle. Now, back then, it was very controversial to, only release on PS5. I was actually a very big defender of it, and a lot of people, did not like that. It's aged well, and I think, as time has gone on, obviously, a year, 2 years, 3 years, yes, it is time to leave the PS4 behind. I will say, looking back, thinking about it, 6 months for a game that, it came out 2020 on PS4, and then you have it, come out a year later, this, extra thing, and it's PS5 exclusive. I get it. I get why, it was kind of a problem to people. Again, I didn't mind it, and the history, like behind the scenes, the development team specifically talked about not just this DLC, but kind of doing this remastered port almost, right? Like moving it up to the PS5. That was extremely important to them because this was their test subject, basically, to see how to work the PS5, right? They made it, the original Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PS4. They made this for the PS5, and that's how they learned how to do it, to which they then took that and started to do, Rebirth. So in terms of like learning and what they needed to do behind the scenes, I think it was quite necessary. But I do understand, the controversy. It was $20, I believe, the DLC itself, this DLC episode that we're going to be talking about. And, it's about 4 hours long. I actually looked because my old save was on my PS5. I think the first time took me 4 hours and 57 minutes. This time I think it took me like 4 hours and 22 minutes. I think I did slightly less Fort Condor this time, and we're going to talk about that as well. So you're with Yuffie, and actually, as I said, last week for Final Fantasy VII Remake, Yuffie, much like Tifa, much like Aerith, much like Cloud, Sephiroth, all these characters, I actually first saw them in Kingdom Hearts. That was my introduction because I never played, any Final Fantasies. I didn't know until I was probably in my teenage years, to be honest with you. Maybe actually with like Final Fantasy 13, and then I didn't even know like if they all connected or like, what was the deal with it. But I first met Yuffie through Kingdom Hearts, so that was like my in on her character. She's a great character. She is fun. I think she's supposed to be 16 in canon, so she's supposed to be younger, and she's got this side to her where she pushes herself and she tries to be very adult-like, but obviously she's still a kid, and she still acts like a kid to a certain degree. So I really like her character, and from what I understand of the original Final Fantasy VII, even to this, I feel like they did a really good job. I like the voice actress. I like her character. And, obviously this is only the beginning. I'm also quite impressed with what they managed to do, not just with her, but her partner over here on this side. They did some pretty cool stuff. And he's barely, well, I don't want to say barely, like he comes in a little bit late. You maybe spend like 2.5, 3 hours with the two of them combined. And, at the end of this game or the end of this DLC, which I do want to talk spoilers, so we're going to talk about the end of it, just kind of be aware of that. It is pretty emotional. Like, they do quite a bit. They have some excellent cutscenes. I mentioned that last week with just how good visually, beyond everything else, that maybe is a little bit more subjective, but the visuals, holy dear God. And, when she steps out and she watches, the plate fall and it's that explosion, that CG that we talked about again in last week's video, they only use that a few times in the base game. It's only like 4 or 5 times in the entirety of the game that it looks that movie-like. It's basically Advent Children if you made it, right now. You get to see that, so you get to see, her expression to it being dropped and frustration of losing, a close brother-like figure, even though she says, like, I'm not your sister multiple times. He is a brother-like figure to her, loses him, then goes out, sees all that happen, and then, it transitions again visually to the core gang. And it was really cool, I think, to see them again, not just at the end, where it's just a little bit of hiking adventures, right? You see them on the road, just kind of conversing with each other. Not just that, but I really liked, I believe in chapter 1, right? Just kind of seeing them talk, right? Like seeing Jesse and Biggs and Wedge talk about, their first mission, and then seeing Tifa and Barrett come in with, with all that, with the Don and all that. I thought that was really cool, and I think they did a really good job of Yuffie coming in and all of this stuff already happening, right? Like inserting her into the story that if this is your first time, again, at the time it is my first time, you play through 7 Remake, and then, there's room there for other things to happen while that story is taking place, right? And then in this game, they do that. They insert her kind of in maybe like the 30 to 40% mark of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and then she's just kind of there. And then they really, I would say, rushed through the, like the middle part, like anything like with Aerith, right? Like obviously that doesn't apply to Yuffie, and then the plate dropping. So they kind of skip, towards the end. But I think they did a really good job of inserting her there and telling a pretty cool story with her, but then also, again, kind of showing you where she fits in the timeline of, kind of popping in and what the core group that we had just played, was doing. So story-wise, I think it was good. It was very short, very, very short, and, the beginning is more like introductions, but I think it's got some really cool scenes, like when she introduces herself, and she takes off the outfit, and then she's got the classic, her classic outfit on. I think that is an incredibly cool scene. It's fun, she like falls off the crane, right after. Like there's some really cool moments, and then even if you jump towards the end, well, you got to build this almost brother sister like bond again, even though Yuffie kind of pushes away from that. But I think that's other things kind of going on, right? And then now another thing that I was not aware of, and even when I played this the first time, I really don't even know what I was thinking, because like thinking in my head as things were playing out, because I am much more educated now as to the original story and the surrounding material. Advent Children, Dirge of Cerberus, which we're about to bring up literally right now. So at the end, with Nero, and it's like, he's a very cool looking guy. It's a cool boss fight. What happens to Sonnen is quite interesting as well. And the first time, I guess I kind of just like went with it. This time I was like, okay, let's read into it. Let's try to like catch up on the lore. My only connection to Dirge of Cerberus is actually Retro Rebound, Mr. Matty Plays. He did a video on that, and I feel like I've definitely seen the box cover before. I've definitely heard of it, but his video kind of going a little bit more into depth as to what the game actually was the first time I heard it, right? So seeing that first, playing this, now, it did help. It did help. It's like, oh, cool. So they're doing some connections. I mean, having him be a new character, right, like spices things up. They kind of went very different, in this DLC, took it in a different direction. And I know I saw some complaints of like how Yuffie was acting, or what he kind of brought into her life, and it's like you had to be careful, because a lot of Yuffie's character development is through Cloud later on, right, like in Final Fantasy VII. So to have everything happen to her and to have her transform too much is not something you need to do or want to do in this DLC, right? You kind of have to wait for it. So I personally didn't mind it. I think they told a pretty solid story in very little time. They had to establish her. They had to, develop some sort of relationship between the two. They had to have them pull off their own little mission. They got to, in that way, kind of pull characters away, like Scarlet, right, away from what she should have probably been doing in Final Fantasy VII Remake, right? They pulled her to them. You had that little action, and then you had, the situation that happened with these two, and then, the ending. And I think that worked actually really, really well. I actually kind of thought it was longer, though, the first time versus this time. So, when you get on the train, it's chapter 2, and I was like, I think I looked at the percentage, and it was at like 48% right before I got on the train. And I was like, wait a second, is there only 2 chapters? And yeah, there was. So I forgot about that. So it moves fast. This is a very fast DLC. And most of it, well, we just covered the story and the characters there. The only other part of it, of course, is the gameplay, which is actually, I would say, kind of light. Now, I didn't mind it. I want to talk about Fort Condor first, because I think this game rocks, okay? Now, I thought, or I at least assumed, that it was already a pre-existing thing. I looked it up. I saw what the original Fort Condor was versus this. I really like tower defenses are not necessarily like a guilty pleasure. Like I don't really play them, but I can think back in time to my youth. Like they were one of the genres, whether it be like on computer or even kind of phone. Like I've always been drawn to tower defenses. So seeing Fort Condor and playing it in I would say a new way now, I was really impressed by it. I remember back 3 years ago playing this and thinking, oh yeah, this is an awesome improvement thing to just add to it. And these are your side missions. You have like the virtual training, bosses to do. You have the main stuff, and you have, I guess, exploration, and then this. Like you really don't have, even if you did everything in this game, it really would only take you, 5, 6, maybe 7 hours. If you kind of skip through a couple of the Fort Condor, that maybe takes you, 4 or 5, and that's what kind of happened to me. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. It is kind of strategic, and they give you plenty of variety. You beat the characters, and some of them are callbacks, to characters in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and they act kind of weird, and they're just now you're just there to play Fort Condor, right? But the game's really fun. Like I really, really enjoyed doing it. And then the combat. I'll say this about the combat. Well, we talked again about the original Final Fantasy VII Remake. I really like the combat. I think it's good. I think I approached it differently this time than I did the first time. I think I was overall better. I was a bit more strategic. I was definitely issuing way more commands more often this time. I was trying to be strategic with that. I really went into weapon upgrades and focusing on who's going to have what material. Like I took it seriously. Definitely took it seriously this time. When it came to this DLC, 2 things to throw out there. Number one, I really like her combat style. I think it's fun. It's very different, and I cannot wait to do it with the other characters, in Rebirth. So it actually gets me more excited because it's like, okay, they're all kind of carry. Oh, well, really, Yuffie is too, because now we've played as all of them, and you kind of carry it over, but like Red 13 and stuff, right? But Yuffie's just such a different, fighting style versus the rest of them, that not only was it fun here, but it's like, okay, well, combining her with Aerith or combining her with Cloud, this is going to kind of be a blast. Would I have liked to have played as him? Yeah, kind of. I don't mind all that much the ability or the idea that you can only issue abilities, with him. I think it worked fine. He's much like, I would say, we talked about in the last video. A problem I had kind of with the AI is they're not almost aggressive enough. They definitely keep themselves alive, and that's much appreciated. But they don't really go on the attack. They don't really build up their ability, bars. So you kind of almost have to do it for them in a way. There's nothing you can really do with him. You have to just let him get his abilities filled, and then you issue out the commands. I liked his character. I think he was a cool, like, bigger brother, like influence on Yuffie. And then his fighting style, really liked it. His abilities, very good. So the fighting itself is really fun. You don't really do it all that much. There's like 2 or 3, bigger boss fights in the entire thing. And, the first like caterpillar-like thing, it was fine. I think it was maybe more like a scorpion, whatever it was supposed to be. Pretty okay. Not like a legendary boss. Nero, he was definitely fun. But you know what? That really goes into the second point. Not all that challenging. I played this on normal, which in the main game, I felt because I was being so strategic, because I was looking in every, nook and cranny and getting all the materia and leveling it up. And I wouldn't say I grinded all that much in the 7 Remake, but I definitely put in the work to, like, be ready. I got through it, and then the Sephiroth fight kind of, like, kicked my butt, on normal difficulty in 7 Remake. In this, she's already higher, actually both of them, right, are already higher level. They start you with materia. You can get a few others. They start you with money. So you're pretty good. I actually respect that quite a bit. You don't start from 0. They already kind of have, pre-established things that these characters use. Much appreciated. The combat actually was pretty darn easy. That Scorpion Centipede boss fight was probably the hardest one, and it's just because you're still that was only like maybe an hour and a half in, right? So you're still kind of getting your legs under you. Nero actually, like, he looks intimidating. His powers are intimidating and they're kind of scary. But you know what? I actually kind of coasted by his boss, Scarlet. I think I remember not being like afraid all that much originally. Playing her again, it's like, yes, she's really not that bad. When the mech jumps up to like get the electric, like prong kind of hands, it's so like terror. It's supposed to be, at least. And I was like, oh dear God, like, is this gonna do like a lot of damage? It does do a lot of damage if you get hit directly with it, but mostly, like, it's not all that bad. Those attacks aren't too bad. If you focus, just on her, you focus on left claw, right claw, or whatever, you can get that thing down pretty easily. So, I guess I just wanted to throw that in there because that actually caught me off guard, and it was something I was thinking. Maybe it's because I played Remake, just now, and I put like, 35, 40 hours in, and so I'm so used to the combat that even though these characters are different, it was something you kind of just pick up. I also think it's their style. Yuffie, what I realized quite early, you can get in close with her, and there's sometimes you're almost supposed to, some combos, but mainly at least what I found was successful in the 4 hours I played, was to stay far away. Throwing the things and leaving them out there, not retrieving them, right? Leaving them and hitting them with like the orbs. That I found that worked quite well, quite often against those like mech things that they explode and they create like a shockwave, and then like the more like faster, nimble kind of guys jump out of it. I remember struggling against them originally. I did not struggle with them at all. The things I struggled the most with in this game were those stupid dogs. When they would do like that one ability and jump on you and take out like half your health. If you get nailed by that, you're screwed. If you don't get nailed by that, then you kind of coast by it. Those were actually the hardest things. Nero, you just dodge a little bit. You have healing stuff, ready to rock. And because really, like, not really Sonnen, right? Like Yuffie primarily supposed to kind of stay further away. It worked pretty well, where like she was never all that much in danger because her fighting style is to almost stay away, from the danger. So I found that just to be something kind of interesting when I played. It was like, oh, the combat not only is different, but it actually feels quite easy, not nearly as challenging. Now, maybe you want it to be a little bit more challenging. I actually, after getting kicked, in the face by Sephiroth in the ending there, I was like, okay, I'll take this. I'll absolutely take it. So overall, I had a lot of fun. Like, I'm glad I played it again. I felt just like I did, in 7 Remake, like, in some ways I actually did like it more, or at least I appreciate it, right? Because I thought of, Dirge of Cerberus. I was like, okay, so there's Nero, right? And you're kind of introducing some newer elements, and like, is this going to come back in different ways than the original? So I'm thinking about that. It's good to see these characters again, specifically, again, Yuffie, someone who I grew up with in like Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 or whatever, but not really in Final Fantasy. So all that was good. A little shorter, than I remembered it being, but really, I mean, I almost replicated my exact, time. I made about like 30 minutes, almost the exact time as last time. So I had a lot of fun, and I respect, in a way, I can understand the arguments of $20 for 4 to 5 hours. People nowadays, right, they wonder, okay, $70, what does $70 get you, right? Do you need 70 hours for $70? So I can see that potentially have been an issue. I could see the PS5 thing, potentially being an issue. But overall, I'm glad they made this. I think it was maybe not like fully necessary, but it was cool to introduce Yuffie in this way. And now, you just go forward. So now in Rebirth, like, you as a player kind of caught up. They, as a developer, they don't have to spend as long, right? Because you did get a fairly okay backstory as to at least the most her personality, right? Like, you definitely know who she is. There's definitely, if you only played this, or if you only know Yuffie through this DLC, there's definitely some almost like unanswered questions and kind of like motivational things and things she's kind of like wrestling with. There is that stuff that they'll continue. Now, again, in 7, they kind of just did it all, and we talked about that, the impressiveness, I feel, of Final Fantasy VII, the original, where, they turned it into a crisis core. You can make part of 7 into Crisis Core. You can do a Yuffie thing in 7 and just kind of split it off and do, you know, an expanded episode just on her. So let me know what you guys think of the DLC in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel. Like I said, next up, I guess, at least in the Final Fantasy realm, should be the original Final Fantasy VII. We'll do that towards the second half of the year, okay? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.